I was sitting in my beat-up truck holding my coffee when the group chat notification lit up my screen. It was a message from my dad about his upcoming retirement party. It read, "Don't come to my retirement party. The whole family doesn't want you there. You're a loser." I didn't scream. I didn't throw my phone. I just stared at the screen, clenched my jaw, and smiled a cold, hard smile. Then, I picked up the phone and canceled the $15,000 luxury yacht club venue I had secretly paid for to surprise him. They had absolutely no idea what was about to hit them. "Thank you for being here. Grab a warm glass of water. Sit down and listen to me tell the whole story." It was a Tuesday morning. The kind of bitter, gray February morning where the cold seeps right through the floorboards of an old truck and settles into your bones. I was sitting in the driver's seat of my battered F-150, the heater blasting a weak stream of warm air against my frozen knuckles. The smell of sawdust and cheap dark roast coffee filled the cab. It was just another day of trying to make a living, trying to build something solid with my own two hands. My phone vibrated in the cup holder. The screen lit up with a notification from a group chat titled, "Dad's Big Send-Off." My father, Robert, was retiring. He had built a regional real estate empire from the ground up. A man who measured every ounce of a person's worth by the badge on their car and the balance in their bank account. For months, the family had been buzzing about this retirement party. It was supposed to be the social event of the season for our family, a crowning achievement where he could parade his success in front of his wealthy friends and business partners. I picked up the phone, expecting another message from my mother about color palettes or demanding that everyone rent tuxedos from a specific, overpriced tailor downtown. Instead, it was a direct message from my dad. No greeting, no context. "Don't come to my retirement party. The whole family doesn't want you there. You're a loser." I stopped breathing. The hum of the truck's engine seemed to fade into a distant buzz. I read the words again and again. I waited for the follow-up text, the "just kidding," or "someone took my phone." But the screen remained perfectly still. The cursor blinked. The silence in the truck was deafening. For 35 years, I had bent over backward to earn a single nod of approval from that man. I had shown up to every awkward holiday dinner, endured every subtle insult about my clothes, my truck, and my bank account. And this was it, a digital dismissal, a casual toss into the garbage. I didn't scream. I didn't smash my fist against the steering wheel. A strange, icy calm washed over me. The tightness in my chest, a knot of anxiety I had carried since childhood, suddenly unraveled. I clenched my jaw, feeling a hard, cold smile stretch across my face. I opened my contacts and scrolled down to a number I had saved weeks ago, the Lakeside Yacht Club. I hit dial. The phone rang twice before a polished voice answered. "Lakeside Yacht Club, Events Coordination. This is Marcus." "Hi, Marcus. This is Elijah," I said, my voice eerily steady. "I need to make a change to the reservation for the Robert Retirement Gala next weekend." "Of course, sir. How can I help?" "Cancel it. The whole thing. Release the room." There was a pause on the line. "Sir, you understand that your $15,000 deposit is non-refundable at this late date?" "I don't care," I replied, staring out at the frosty windshield. "Cancel the catering. Tell the jazz band to stay home, and take his name off the marquee. The party is off." "Very well, sir. It's cancelled." I hung up. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. They had banned me from a party I was paying for. To understand how a father could say something like that to his own flesh and blood, you have to understand the house I grew up in, and the golden shadow I spent my entire life trying to escape. Growing up in my parents' house was like living inside a museum where you weren't allowed to touch the exhibits. Everything was immaculate, expensive, and utterly devoid of warmth. My father, Robert, made his fortune flipping commercial properties in the early 90s. The day he brought home his first Rolls-Royce, he stopped seeing people and started seeing price tags. My mother, Eleanor, was the perfect accessory to his ambition. She spent her days at the country club and her evenings redecorating rooms that nobody ever sat in. The furniture was wrapped in velvet and silk, The floors were polished marble that made your footsteps echo like a warning. And then there was my older brother, Julian. Julian was the golden boy. From the moment he could talk, he knew exactly how to play the game. He wore the right clothes, made the right friends, and eventually went off to an Ivy League school to become a corporate lawyer. In my father's eyes, Julian was the ultimate return on investment. I was the glitch in the system. While Julian was memorizing debate tactics and practicing his golf swing, I was out in the garage, covered in grease and sawdust. I loved the smell of cut pine. I loved the weight of a hammer in my hand. I loved taking broken things and making them whole again. I didn't want a corner office. I wanted a workshop. When I announced I wasn't going to business school and was instead taking an apprenticeship with a master carpenter, you would have thought I had committed a violent crime. A carpenter? My father had sneered, standing in the kitchen in his tailored suit, looking at me like I was a stray dog that had wandered onto his pristine rug. That's not a career, Elijah. That's a hobby for people who fail college. You're going to spend your life taking orders from people like your brother. From that day on, I became the black sheep. At family gatherings, they would introduce Julian with a laundry list of his accomplishments, his degrees, his prestigious firm. When they got to me, my mother would wave a hand vaguely in my direction and say, "And this is Elijah. He does manual labor." I spent my 20s trying to prove them wrong. I worked 70-hour weeks. I honed my craft. I started my own renovation business, focusing on high-end custom woodwork. I made a good living, but it didn't matter. Because my hands were calloused and my boots had mud on them, I was entirely invisible to them. The dynamic was never clearer than it was 5 years ago, at Thanksgiving dinner. It was a crisp November evening, and the dining room table was groaning under the weight of silver platters and crystal wine glasses. We were all seated when Julian arrived 40 minutes late. He didn't apologize. Instead, he tossed a set of heavy keys onto the marble counter and announced he had just bought a brand new Porsche 911. The room erupted in applause. My mother practically wept with pride. My father poured Julian a glass of scotch that cost more than my first car. For the next hour, the only topic of conversation was Julian's massive new salary, his corner office, and his brilliant legal mind. When the dessert plates were cleared, my father stood up and clinked his glass with a silver spoon. He loved holding court. "I want to take a moment to recognize the hard work in this family," Robert announced, puffing out his chest. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a stack of crisp, white envelopes. He walked over to Julian and handed him a thick envelope. "For you, son. A little something extra for your future children's college fund. You've earned it." Julian smirked, peeling back the flap to reveal a check with a lot of zeros. My father then walked over to my youngest brother, Cameron, who was still finding his way in a marketing firm, and handed him an envelope. "To help with the down payment on that condo, Cam." Then he stopped at my chair. The room went quiet. He looked down at me, his eyes running over my plain button-down shirt. He reached into his pocket and casually tossed a small, unsealed envelope onto my plate. It landed next to my slice of pie. I opened it. It was a gift card to Home Depot for $100. "Figured you could use some new nails or whatever it is you buy," my father said, already turning his back and walking to the liquor cabinet. My cousin Dylan, who was sitting across from me, leaned over, a nasty grin spreading across his face. "Hey, Elijah," Dylan mocked loudly, making sure the whole table could hear. "If you need a loan to fix up that rust bucket truck you drive, just let Julian know. I'm sure his lawyer salary can float you a few bucks." Laughter erupted around the table. Julian chuckled, taking a sip of his wine. My mother smiled indulgently. I sat there, gripping my fork under the table so hard my knuckles turned white. The metal dug into my palm, grounding me. I wanted to stand up, flip the table and walk out, but I swallowed the lump in my throat. I forced a tight smile, put the gift card in my pocket, and quietly said, "Thanks, Dad." I took the humiliation because I still foolishly believed that one day, if I just kept my head down and worked hard enough, they would finally see my worth. The sickest part of it all was that whenever they actually needed something real, something that couldn't be bought with a signature on a check, I was the first person they called. And I always showed up. 2 winters ago, Julian's finished basement flooded at 3 in the morning during a massive storm. A pipe burst, and the water was rising fast, threatening his expensive home theater system. He didn't call his lawyer friends. He didn't call our father. He called me, panicking. I got out of my warm bed, loaded my truck with industrial water pumps and wet vacs, and drove through an ice storm to his house. I spent 4 hours knee-deep in freezing, filthy water in the dark, wrestling with heavy hoses while Julian stood at the top of the stairs in his silk pajamas, complaining about the smell. I saved tens of thousands of dollars of his property. A week later, I overheard Julian at a family barbecue telling Dylan about the flood. "Yeah, it was a mess," Julian bragged. "But I hired some local handyman to come pump it out. Cost me a few bucks, but you know how it is. Hard to find good help these days." He never even mentioned my name. He never offered me a dime for the equipment rental or my time. Then there was the jewelry box. My mother had inherited a stunning, antique mahogany jewelry box from her grandmother. It was falling apart, the hinges rusted, the wood dried out and splintering. It was a piece of our family history, a literal inheritance, and she mentioned she was going to throw it out because it looked trashy. I asked her to let me fix it. For a month, I stayed in my workshop every night after my regular jobs. I carefully stripped the old varnish, re-glued the joints, custom-machined brass hinges to match the originals, and lined the inside with fresh, plush velvet. I put 40 hours of meticulous, loving labor into that box. On Mother's Day, I wrapped it beautifully and handed it to her. When she opened it, it looked brand new, glowing with the deep, rich warmth of restored wood. "Oh," she said, looking at it blankly. "You fixed it. Thanks." She closed the lid, set it on a side table, and immediately turned back to open a designer handbag Julian had bought her. A month later, I was looking for a pen in her hallway closet and found the jewelry box shoved in the back, buried under a pile of old winter coats. My sweat, my time, my love, it meant absolutely nothing to them. They only valued what came with a brand name attached. I probably would have endured their abuse forever if it had only been directed at me. But then I met Claire, and everything changed. Claire was a preschool teacher. She was warm, grounded, and had a laugh that made you feel like you were standing in the sunshine. She didn't care about cars or zip codes. She cared about people. When I came home covered in drywall dust, she didn't crinkle her nose. She kissed my cheek and asked how my day was. She saw the man I was, not the bank account I didn't have. When I brought Claire home to meet the family, I warned her it might be rough. I drastically underestimated them. My mother took one look at Claire's off-the-rack dress and decided immediately that she was beneath us. To my family, a teacher was basically a glorified babysitter. At every holiday, every family gathering, they treated my wife like the hired help. While Julian's flavor-of-the-month girlfriends were offered champagne and seated on the velvet sofas, my mother would corner Claire by the coat rack. "Claire, dear," Eleanor would coo, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Since you're so good with children, would you mind keeping an eye on your cousin's kids in the basement? The adults are going to have cocktails in the living room." And Claire, bless her heart, would just smile her bright, genuine smile and say, "Of course, Mrs. Miller." She would spend the entire Thanksgiving or Christmas playing board games with screaming toddlers while my family drank expensive wine upstairs and ignored our existence. I would try to intervene, but Claire would gently squeeze my hand. "It's fine, Eli," she'd whisper. "I like the kids better than them anyway." She never complained. She never asked me to cut them off. She just stood by me, an unshakable pillar of support. But I saw the way her shoulders slumped after we left those dinners. I saw the quiet hurt in her eyes when my mother would introduce her to guests by saying, "This is Elijah's wife. She works at a daycare." I could take their punches. I was used to being the punching bag. But watching them disrespect the woman who brought light into my life was a slow-acting poison. It was building a pressure inside me, a pressure that was desperately looking for a way out. And that pressure finally found its release on that freezing February morning, staring at my phone in the cab of my truck. The text from my father, "Don't come to my retirement party. The whole family doesn't want you there. You're a loser," was just the spark. What followed was a full-blown avalanche. I hadn't replied. I just sat there, watching the screen as the rest of the family saw the blood in the water and circled like sharks. Julian was the first to chime in. "Honestly, Dad is right," Julian typed. "It's a black tie event for his major investors. Don't embarrass the family by showing up in your paint-stained jeans trying to network for handyman jobs." My cousin Dylan, never one to miss an opportunity to kiss up to Julian, sent a Photoshop meme into the chat. It was a picture of a garbage man, but my face was pasted over it, wearing a clown nose. The caption read, "Employee of the Month." My phone buzzed again. It was my mother, Eleanor. "Elijah, please try to understand," she wrote, adopting her usual tone of a long-suffering victim. "This night is about your father's legacy. It's for the best if you stay home. Besides, Claire doesn't own a dress appropriate for a high society event anyway. We don't want her feeling out of place." That was it. That was the kill shot. My vision blurred. A hot, blinding wave of rage crashed over me. They weren't just attacking my career or my bank account anymore. They were attacking my wife. They were reducing the kindest, most hard-working woman I knew to a punchline about a dress. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my forearms ached. I wanted to drive straight to my father's McMansion, kick the mahogany front door off its hinges, and tear the place apart with my bare hands. I wanted to scream until my throat bled. But then, the rage crested and broke, leaving behind a cold, crystalline clarity. If I yelled, if I fought back in that chat, I would just be giving them exactly what they wanted. I would be the unhinged, emotional, blue-collar brute they always painted me as. I would be playing their game by their rules on their turf. I wasn't going to play anymore. I was going to flip the board over. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of the parking lot. The cord was cut. The bridge was burned. I was free. I drove straight home. It was barely 10 in the morning, but I couldn't focus on laying hardwood floors or installing custom cabinets today. I pulled into my driveway. It was a modest, 3-bedroom ranch house. It needed a new roof and the siding was faded, but it was ours. The front door opened, and the smell of cinnamon and coffee drifted out. I walked into the kitchen. Claire was standing at the stove, making oatmeal for our 2 kids, Caleb and Lily. Caleb was running a toy dump truck over the linoleum, and Lily was coloring at the table. It was chaotic, loud, and incredibly beautiful. Claire looked up, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her brow furrowed when she saw my face. "Eli, what's wrong? Why are you home so early?" I walked over to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down heavily. I didn't say a word. I just unlocked my phone, opened the group chat, and slid the device across the table toward her. Claire picked it up. I watched her eyes dart back and forth as she read the messages. My father's dismissal. Julian's arrogance. Dylan's meme. My mother's insult about her dress. I braced myself. I expected her to cry. I expected her to get angry, to tell me to call them and give them a piece of my mind. Instead, Claire slowly set the phone face down on the table. She took a deep breath. Her jaw set, and a fierce, protective light ignited in her eyes. She walked around the table, wrapped her arms around my shoulders from behind, and pressed her cheek against my head. "What do we do now?" she asked quietly. Not, "What are you going to do?" Not, "I told you they were awful." Just we. In that single, defining moment, I realized I had already won the lottery of life. I had a family, a real family. They were right here in this kitchen. The people in that group chat were just strangers who happened to share my DNA. "We do nothing," I said, reaching up to hold her hand. "We don't reply. We don't argue. We disappear from their radar, and we build a life so big and so successful that they can't even comprehend it." Claire kissed the top of my head. "Okay, let's get to work." That night, after the kids were asleep, I walked out onto our back porch. The air was freezing, but I didn't feel the cold. I was running on pure, uncut adrenaline. I had a plan, but I needed pieces to fall into place. First, I dialed Nathan. Nathan was a guy I played high school football with. He was a brilliant tech nerd who ran a boutique digital marketing and web design firm. A few years ago, when his business was struggling, I renovated his office space for the cost of materials just to help him out. He owed me one. "Eli, man, it's late. Everything okay?" Nathan answered, sounding groggy. "Nate, I need a favor," I said, leaning against the porch railing. "I need a website, not just a landing page with my phone number. I need a high-end, luxury portfolio site. I need it to look like I charge $1,000 an hour. And I need it live by the end of the week." Over the years, I had done some incredible work: custom wine cellars, hidden library doors, complete historical restorations. I just never bothered taking professional photos or bragging about it. I relied on word of mouth. That was stopping tonight. "I can do that," Nathan said, his voice sharpening with interest. "Send me every photo you have. What's the rush? I'm going hunting for whales, Nate." I hung up and scrolled through my contacts again. This time, I stopped on my cousin Samuel. Samuel was the black sheep of my aunt's side of the family. He had moved away to Charleston, South Carolina, a decade ago to invest in rental properties. My family mocked him for leaving, but Samuel was smart. He was the only relative who ever treated me with an ounce of respect. I called him. He picked up on the first ring. "Elijah? Long time no hear, buddy. What's going on?" "Sam, I'm cutting the cord," I said plainly. "I'm done with them. All of them. I need to get out of this state. I remember you saying the housing market down in Charleston is booming for custom builders." "It's exploding, man," Samuel said, his voice dropping low. "Old money, new money, tech money moving in. They can't build custom homes fast enough. Do you have any rental properties empty right now?" "Funny you ask. I just finished rehabbing a 3-bedroom on James Island. Big fenced yard, huge detached garage you could use as a workshop. It goes on the market next week." "Don't list it," I said. "I'll take it. Give me a month to wrap up my jobs here. It's yours, brother." "And Eli? Good for you. It's about damn time." I ended the call and looked up at the stars. The gears were turning. The escape hatch was open. For the next 3 weeks, I played a dangerous, exhilarating game of psychological warfare. I didn't block my family. I didn't leave the group chat. I just muted it. I wanted them to see my name sitting in the participant list. I wanted them to wonder why I hadn't reacted, why I hadn't come crawling back to beg for forgiveness like I always did. Instead of arguing, I let Nathan's work do the talking. The new website launched, and it was a masterpiece. Sleek, modern, and featuring high-resolution photos of my absolute best work. I started posting on my social media accounts I knew Julian and Dylan stalked. I posted a video of a secret, motorized bookcase door I had engineered for a wealthy tech CEO's private study. I posted a photo gallery of a $200,000 custom kitchen remodel I had done for a local surgeon, featuring imported Italian marble and hand-carved mahogany cabinets. I never mentioned my family. I never posted a single negative word. I just projected absolute, undeniable success. Then came the kicker. A very wealthy client of mine, a guy whose historic downtown loft I had completely restored, couldn't attend a highly exclusive charity gala. He gifted the tickets to Claire and me. These were tickets that cost $1,000 a plate. Claire went to a vintage consignment shop and found a stunning, classic black gown. I rented a sharp tuxedo. We attended the gala, drank champagne, and mingled with the exact type of people my father spent his life trying to impress. We took a photo in front of the ice sculpture, Claire looking like a movie star, and I posted it online with the caption, "A beautiful night with my beautiful wife." The next morning, my phone chimed. It was a private message from Julian. "Saw your post," Julian wrote. "How did you afford tickets to the Children's Hospital Gala? Did you take out another loan? Don't bankrupt yourself trying to pretend you're something you're not." I read the message, laughed out loud, and hit the back button. I left him on read. No reply, Just the agonizing silence of a man who suddenly realized he didn't have the power anymore. I could practically smell Julian's jealousy burning through the screen. They expected a broken, defeated carpenter. Instead, they were watching me thrive. Then came the day of my father's retirement party. I was at my workshop, packing up my expensive power tools into heavy-duty shipping crates. My mind was completely focused on the move to Charleston. I hadn't thought about the party all day. At 7:30 p.m., my phone started vibrating violently across the workbench. I looked down. It was Cameron, my youngest brother. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Eli. Holy crap. Eli, are you there?" Cameron was whispering frantically. I could hear the echo of bathroom tiles behind him. "I'm here, Cam. What's going on?" "Dude, it's a disaster. A complete nightmare," Cameron hissed, sounding caught between sheer panic and suppressed laughter. "We just showed up at the Lakeside Yacht Club. Dad had his tailor-made suit on, Mom was dripping in pearls. We walked into the lobby, and Dad marched up to the event coordinator and demanded to be shown to the grand ballroom. I leaned against my workbench, a slow smile spreading across my face. And the guy looked at his clipboard and said there was no event booked under the name Robert Miller. Dad lost his mind. He started screaming, saying he was a VIP, that he had a reservation for 50 people. "What did the coordinator say?" I asked, enjoying every single second. "He said the room had been booked and paid for by an Elijah Miller, but that Mr. Elijah Miller had canceled the event entirely last week." Dad turned purple. I thought he was going to have a heart attack. "He demanded they open the room anyway since he was your father." "Let me guess. Security?" "Yep," Cameron wheezed. "The manager threatened to call the cops if we didn't leave." Dad's major investors were standing right behind us in the lobby, watching the whole thing. We had to do the walk of shame back to the cars. Now we're sitting at a booth in a Texas roadhouse off the highway. Dad is staring at his blooming onion like he wants to murder it, and Mom is crying in the bathroom. "Eli, did you do that?" "He banned me from the party, Cam," I said coldly. "I just took my name off the tab." "You're a madman," Cameron whispered. "I gotta go before they notice I'm missing." He hung up. I stood in my quiet workshop, the hum of the fluorescent lights buzzing above me. I had just ruined the most important social night of my father's life, using nothing but a single phone call. I felt a deep, profound sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just revenge. It was justice. As I turned back to pack my saws, my business phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. "Elijah Custom Woodwork," I answered. "Elijah, my name is Carter Davis," a deep, gravelly voice said on the other end. "I recently purchased the Harrison estate on West 4th. I was admiring the library restoration you did for the previous owner. It's extraordinary work. Thank you, Mr. Davis. I appreciate that. I don't just hand out compliments, son. I'm looking for a partner. I want to meet you for lunch tomorrow. Are you available?" "I am." "Good. Don't be late." The line clicked dead. I stared at the phone. I didn't know it yet, but that brief phone call was about to strap a rocket engine to my life. The next day, I walked into a high-end steakhouse downtown. I was wearing clean jeans, boots, and a tailored button-down shirt. I wasn't going to pretend to be a suit-and-tie guy. I spotted Carter Davis immediately. He was an older man, sharp-eyed, wearing an expensive watch but a casual sweater. He looked like a man who didn't need to prove his wealth to anyone. I sat down and we ordered coffee. Carter didn't waste time with small talk. "I ran a background check on you, Elijah," Carter said, stirring his coffee. "Standard procedure before I do business with anyone. You've got a clean record, fantastic credit, and a portfolio that belongs in Architectural Digest. But I also noticed your last name. You're Robert Miller's son, aren't you?" My posture stiffened. "I am, but my business is entirely my own. We don't operate together." Carter let out a dry, barking laugh. "Thank God for that. Your father is a snake. 10 years ago, he tried to undercut me on a massive commercial zoning deal. Played dirty. He cares about the image, the quick buck. He doesn't care about the foundation." Carter leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. But looking at your work, the way you jointed those mahogany beams in the Harrison Library, you care about the foundation. You build things to last. I said cautiously. I'm retiring from the tech sector, Carter stated. But I'm bored. I want to build something tangible. Luxury, high-end, custom smart homes. Places where the woodwork is traditional and flawless, but the entire house is run by integrated, invisible technology. The market for this in the South, specifically Charleston, is wide open. But I need a master builder to run the physical operations. My heart hammered against my ribs. Charleston, the exact city Samuel had a house waiting for me. It was like the universe was clearing a path. I'm moving to Charleston in 3 weeks, I said. Carter raised an eyebrow, impressed. Is that so? Well then, I'm willing to back you. I will inject $500,000 of seed capital into a new joint venture. You run the crews, the design, the builds. I handle the tech integration and the high society networking. We split the profits 60-40 in your favor. I sat perfectly still. $500,000. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a massive promotion to the major leagues. It was the kind of money Julian bragged about, but this was real. This was built on respect and skill, not manipulation and family politics. Mr. Davis, I said, extending my calloused hand across the table. You have yourself a partner. He shook my hand firmly. Call me Carter. And Elijah, let's go build an empire. The final 3 weeks in my hometown passed in a blur of hyper-focused energy. Claire and I operated like a well-oiled machine. We didn't tell a single soul outside of Nathan and Carter what we were doing. We didn't want my family getting wind of it and trying to sabotage it, or worse, suddenly pretending they supported me now that I had real money backing me. We held a massive garage sale, getting rid of everything we didn't absolutely need. At night, with the blinds drawn, we packed our lives into heavy cardboard boxes. Caleb and Lily treated it like a grand adventure, coloring on the boxes and talking about the beach in South Carolina. I officially dissolved my local LLC and registered the new joint venture in South Carolina. Every tie to the soil of my childhood was methodically severed. On the final night, a massive 26-foot moving truck sat idling in our driveway. The house was empty. The hardwood floors echoed with our footsteps. The walls looked bare and strange. I walked through the rooms one last time. This house had seen my struggles, my quiet tears of frustration after family dinners, my late nights calculating budgets at the kitchen table. But it had also seen my children's first steps and my wife's unwavering love. I stood in the center of the empty living room. The morning sun was just starting to peek through the bare windows, casting long golden squares of light across the dust on the floor. I pulled out my phone and took a single photograph of that empty, sunlit room. I opened the social media app. I didn't tag Julian. I didn't tag Dylan or my parents. I just uploaded the photo with a simple caption. Family isn't about blood. It's about who stays when it counts. To new horizons and building things that last. Goodbye. I hit post. I knew within an hour, Dylan would see it and send it to the group chat. I knew my mother would panic, and my father would rage at the loss of control. But I wouldn't be there to hear it. I walked out the front door, locked it, and dropped the key in the mailbox for the real estate agent. I climbed into the cab of the moving truck next to Claire. She reached over and placed her hand on my knee. She smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears of relief. Ready? She asked. I looked down at my phone. The screen lit up. A call from Dad. I didn't decline it. I didn't let it go to voicemail. I simply popped the back off the phone, pulled the tiny SIM card out with my thumb, and rolled down the window. I flicked the small piece of plastic out into the brisk morning air. It bounced off the asphalt and disappeared into a storm drain. Yeah, I said, putting the truck into gear. I'm ready. Let's go home. As we pulled out of the neighborhood and hit the highway ramp heading south, a profound, overwhelming sense of peace washed over me. I was a ghost to them now. But in Charleston, I was about to become a king. 2 years. It is absolutely incredible what 24 months can do to the landscape of your life when you finally remove the toxic weeds that have been choking your roots. 2 years in Charleston felt like I had stepped out of a suffocating, windowless room and into a completely different universe. The air down here smelled like salt water, blooming jasmine, and raw opportunity. It was a million miles away from the cold, judgmental winters of my childhood, both literally and figuratively. Carter Davis and I had taken that initial $500,000 investment, and we didn't just build a company. We built an absolute juggernaut. Apex Smart Properties became the premier name in the southern real estate market almost overnight. We weren't just building houses for these tech billionaires and old money families. We were engineering luxury. We would buy up massive historic properties, preserve the incredible traditional custom woodwork, the stuff I poured my soul into, and integrate invisible, state-of-the-art technology into the very bones of the homes. You could walk into a library that looked like it belonged in the 18th century. But with a voice command, the temperature adjusted, the hidden security shutters locked, and the antique mirrors turned into digital displays. It was groundbreaking work. I was no longer just the guy with sawdust on his jeans trying to scrape together a living. I managed a massive crew of highly skilled craftsmen, architects, and software engineers. My salary wasn't just a number on a spreadsheet that my father could mock anymore. It was a heavy, undeniable testament to the sweat on my brow and the calluses on my hands. Claire was thriving just as much as I was. Away from the constant, degrading whispers of my mother, Claire's natural brilliance shone brighter than ever. She landed a massive promotion, becoming the head principal of the most prestigious private preschool academy in the entire state. We bought a stunning, sprawling property right on the water. I spent every weekend for 6 months building custom cabinets, hand-carving the door frames, and installing perfect crown molding. It was our sanctuary. We were happy. We were untouchable. We were completely insulated from the poison of my past. But karma is a highly patient hunter. You can outrun a lot of things in this life, but you cannot outrun the consequences of treating people like garbage. Word eventually reached me through Samuel about the absolute catastrophe unfolding with the people I had left behind. It started with the golden boy, my older brother, Julian. Julian had finally flown entirely too close to the sun. His massive ego had convinced him he was somehow smarter than the very law he practiced. Samuel called me one evening, his voice practically shaking with disbelief, to tell me the news. Julian had been quietly embezzling money from his prestigious law firm's escrow accounts for over 3 years. He was using client funds to finance his lavish lifestyle, the exotic vacations, the designer watches, the massive mortgage on his mansion. When the senior partners brought in an outside auditing firm, the sheer scale of his theft was exposed. It was a total bloodbath. Julian wasn't just fired. He was publicly humiliated and permanently disbarred. He lost his license to practice law forever. The day the federal indictment came down and hit the local news, his wife packed up the kids and left. She filed for divorce immediately. She hired a shark of an attorney and fought a brutal, highly public legal battle for full custody of their children. And she won completely. Julian's massive lawyer salary vanished overnight. The bank immediately came and repossessed the pristine Porsche he loved so much. The massive inheritance he always bragged he was going to leave his kids was nothing but a mountain of debt. The last Samuel heard, Julian was living in a cheap, run-down motel by the interstate, waiting for his criminal trial. His pristine reputation was reduced to absolute ashes. He was facing serious federal prison time. But Julian's spectacular downfall was just the appetizer. The main course was my father, Robert's entire real estate empire. The kingdom he used to make everyone else feel incredibly small was built on a foundation of sand, aggressive financial leveraging, and pure, unfiltered arrogance. When the commercial real estate market took a slight dip, his house of cards didn't just wobble. It completely collapsed. But this wasn't just a streak of bad luck in a tough market. An investigation by the SEC uncovered over a decade of cooked books, falsified property valuations, and fraudulent investor reports. Robert had been playing a giant shell game with millions of dollars. Federal agents actually raided his corporate office. Samuel sent me a link to the local news broadcast showing agents carrying boxes of hard drives and files out of the glass building my father used to rule from. Robert managed to avoid actual jail time only because of his advanced age and because he immediately turned state's evidence, ratting out his business partners to save his own skin. But the massive financial penalties and restitution orders wiped him out completely. The bank foreclosed on the giant museum of a house he called a home. The repo men backed a flatbed truck up to his driveway and hauled away the Rolls-Royce. The massive college fund accounts he used to brag about handing out to Julian and Cameron's kids were either entirely fake or completely seized by the government. My mother's beloved country club membership, the cornerstone of her entire social identity, was permanently revoked. Their supposed friends, the exact same high society people they had desperately tried to impress at that disastrous retirement party I canceled, stopped returning their calls overnight. It was like attending the funeral of his ego. Financially, socially, and professionally, my father was completely dead. Desperation makes people do incredibly crazy, irrational things. To escape the suffocating humiliation and the endless whispers in our hometown, Robert and Eleanor packed whatever meager belongings fit into a rented, high-mileage sedan and fled south. They chased rumors of a booming housing market, desperately hoping to salvage scraps of their former glory in a place where nobody knew their names. They ended up right here in Charleston. They rented a tiny, run-down, roach-infested apartment on the deep industrial outskirts of town, right next to a noisy freight train line. Then came the Tuesday morning that completely changed the trajectory of the rest of my life. I was sitting at my desk reviewing a set of architectural blueprints. My office was on the top floor of the Apex building, surrounded by massive, floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking the beautiful harbor. My desk intercom buzzed. It was Sarah, my executive assistant. "Elijah, I'm sorry to interrupt. Your 2 o'clock is here in the lobby. A Mr. Robert Miller, interviewing for the senior site consultant position." I sat back in my heavy leather chair. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly still. Carter Davis usually handled the initial executive screenings. That was our dynamic. But Carter knew exactly what he was doing. Carter had seen Robert's resume come across his desk, instantly recognized the name of the man who had tried to illegally ruin him decades ago, and deliberately scheduled him to meet the CEO directly. Me. I stood up slowly. I walked over to the mirror hanging near the door. I adjusted my tie. I buttoned my tailored suit jacket. I looked at the man in the reflection. I was no longer the desperate kid begging for a crumb of validation. I was a titan in my own right. I walked out of my office and down the long, carpeted hallway toward the main glass-walled conference room. Through the tinted glass, I saw him, Robert. He looked 20 years older than the last time I saw him. His hair was entirely white and thinning badly. He was wearing an outdated, heavily worn suit that hung loosely on his frame, looking like it hadn't been professionally dry-cleaned in months. His shoulders, once so broad and filled with arrogant pride, were heavily slumped forward. He was nervously twisting a cheap plastic promotional pen in his hands, his right leg bouncing up and down with intense anxiety. This was the man who had thrown a hardware store gift card at my plate while handing out thousands to my siblings. This was the man who had banned me from a party I was quietly paying for. This was the man who coldly texted his own son to say, "You're a loser." I pushed the heavy glass door open. The hinges were silent. Robert stood up quickly, practically jumping out of his chair in his eagerness to impress. He pasted on that fake, overly confident salesman smile he had used to charm wealthy investors his entire life. He reached his hand out across the table. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm Robert." His voice instantly died in his throat. The sound just evaporated. He stared at me. His pale blue eyes darted frantically from my face, to the cut of my expensive tailored suit, down to the heavy gold watch on my wrist, and immediately back to my face. His jaw physically dropped open. All the color drained from his face in a split second, leaving his skin looking like wet gray ash. He took a stumbling step backward, his knees hitting the edge of the heavy conference chair. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost walk right through a solid wall. "Elijah?" he whispered, his voice cracking violently, sounding incredibly small and frail. What are you doing here? I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I kept my face an absolute, unreadable mask of stone. I walked calmly to the head of the long mahogany table. I pulled out my heavy leather chair and sat down slowly, making no sudden emotional movements. I picked up his printed resume from the center of the table and folded my hands over it. I am the Chief Executive Officer and the majority owner of Apex Smart Properties. Robert, I said, my voice perfectly level, completely devoid of any anger or affection. Please take a seat. We have an interview to get through. He didn't move. He physically couldn't. He just stood there frozen, his hands shaking so hard the cheap pen rattled loudly against his leg. You own this? This entire company? He stammered, looking wildly around the luxurious, sunlit room as if the glass walls were suddenly closing in to crush him. Carter Davis and I built it from the ground up, I said casually, leaning back and crossing one leg over the other. I hear you're highly familiar with Carter's work, though, from what I understand, you usually prefer stealing his commercial zoning permits behind his back. Robert swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing sharply in his throat. He practically collapsed backward into the chair. The realization was hitting him like a runaway freight train. The crushing gravity of the situation was settling onto his shoulders. The incredibly wealthy, powerful man he was desperately begging for a job, the man holding his literal financial survival in his hands, was the exact same son he had banished from his life. I picked up his resume. I held it between my index finger and thumb like it was a piece of contaminated trash I had found blowing across the sidewalk. I looked at the paper for a long, agonizing minute. I let the heavy silence stretch out in the room until it was absolutely suffocating. I could hear his rapid, shallow breathing. Then, I looked back at him. I leaned forward, resting my elbows firmly on the polished wood table, and I looked him dead in the eye. I channeled the exact same sneering, arrogant tone he had used on me my entire life. Looking closely at this resume, Robert, you don't have a single ounce of modern tech integration experience. Your last company went completely bankrupt while under a federal investigation for massive fraud. Honestly, looking at this piece of paper, it looks to me like you're a loser. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment 1 below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The silence that followed my words was absolute. It was thick and heavy, pressing down on the room. Robert's face turned a deep, mottled shade of crimson, then completely pale again. He looked down at his hands resting on the table. The very same hands that had typed that text message banishing me. The very same hands that had handed out thick envelopes of cash to my siblings while tossing me a piece of plastic. When he finally looked up, the arrogant titan of industry was completely gone. In his place was a terrified, desperate old man. Elijah, he choked out, his voice thick with a raw, ugly desperation I had never heard from him before. Please, you have to listen to me. You have to understand how bad it is out there right now. We lost absolutely everything. Your mother is 68 years old, and she is working the night shift mopping floors at a public laundromat. We can barely afford to keep the lights on and buy basic groceries. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table, leaning his upper body across the polished wood, practically begging. Julian is facing massive federal legal fees for his divorce and the fraud charges. There's no inheritance left for anyone to fall back on. The college fund I swore I set up for Julian's kids is completely gone, frozen and seized by the government to pay back the investors I defrauded. We are entirely destitute. He looked at me, actual tears welling up in his pale eyes and spilling over his wrinkled cheeks. We're family, Elijah. Blood is blood. I know I made terrible mistakes. I know I was too hard on you. But I'm an old man now. I have nowhere else to go. You have to help us. Please, son. Just give me a consulting job. Anything. I sat perfectly still and looked at him. I searched the deepest, darkest corners of my heart for a single shred of pity. I looked for a sliver of the desperate young boy who used to crave his father's approval so badly it physically hurt my chest. I looked for a reason to offer him a lifeline, to forgive him, to embrace the concept of family he was suddenly trying to weaponize. There was absolutely nothing there. Just a cold, hard wall of concrete. Family? I asked quietly, my voice slicing through the tense air of the room like a scalpel. You want to talk about family right now? Robert nodded frantically, wiping tears from his face with the back of his hand. When Julian's basement flooded in the middle of a freezing ice storm, I was family enough to drive over there with heavy equipment and pump it out for free while he slept in his silk pajamas. When Mom's antique jewelry box was broken, I was family enough to spend 40 grueling hours meticulously restoring it just for her to throw it in a dark closet. But when it came to your precious retirement party, I was just a dirty handyman in paint-stained jeans who would embarrass you in front of your rich friends. When it came to my wife, the incredible mother of your grandchildren, she was just a pathetic punchline about a cheap dress. I was stressed back then, Elijah, Robert stammered incredibly quickly, wiping a shaking hand across his sweating forehead. The commercial business was starting to fail behind the scenes. The pressure from the banks was absolutely immense. I just took it out on the easiest target. Stop, I commanded. My voice wasn't a yell, but it echoed sharply off the glass walls with absolute authority. Do not insult my intelligence right now. You didn't care about blood when you handed Julian a massive check and threw a hardware store gift card on my dinner plate. You cared about status. You worshipped money. You worshipped the image of perfection. Now you have no status, you have no image, you have no money, and suddenly you remember you have a son who works with his hands. I stood up slowly. I buttoned my jacket, looking down at the broken, weeping man sitting in my chair. I am a carpenter, Dad, I said, my voice dropping to a low, highly dangerous whisper. And today, I am officially nailing the coffin shut on our relationship. I reached over and pressed the intercom button on the conference room phone. Sarah, please have security come up to the main conference room immediately. Mr. Miller's interview is officially over. He is leaving. Robert jumped up from the chair, his hands trembling violently. You can't do this. You can't just throw me out. I am your father. I gave you life. You owe me a chance to make this right. And I survived you, I replied, turning my back to him completely and looking out the massive window at the sailboats drifting through the harbor. Goodbye, Robert. Do not ever apply to my company again. The heavy glass door opened. 2 large, highly professional security guards entered the room. They didn't even have to touch him. Their imposing, silent presence was enough to break whatever tiny shred of fight he had left. Robert Miller, the great real estate titan, the man who demanded fear and respect from everyone he ever met, slowly shuffled out of the glass room. His head was bowed, his shoulders entirely defeated, completely stripped of the very last ounce of his dignity. I watched his reflection in the glass as the doors closed behind him. 3 days after that explosive meeting in the conference room, the front desk receptionist called my direct line. My youngest brother, Cameron, was standing nervously by the front glass doors of the lobby, asking to see me. I hadn't seen or spoken to Cameron in over 2 years. When I walked downstairs, I barely recognized him. He looked completely exhausted. His clothes were heavily wrinkled. His hair was unkempt, and he had deep, dark, bruised-looking circles under his eyes. I didn't want him making a scene in the lobby of my corporate headquarters, so I walked him across the busy street to a quiet corner booth in a local coffee shop. We sat down. I ordered 2 black coffees. Cameron stared blankly at his mug, his hands wrapped around it for warmth. He told us, Cameron said quietly, his voice raspy. Dad came back to that awful apartment after the interview and just completely broke down. He was sobbing uncontrollably. He told Mom everything that happened in that room. He told her who you are now, what you've built. And? I asked, taking a slow sip of my coffee, feeling absolutely nothing in my chest. Mom hasn't stopped crying for 3 straight days, Cameron sighed, rubbing his tired face with his hands. She's absolutely terrified, Eli. They are getting officially evicted next Tuesday. The landlord is bringing the sheriff. I can't help them. I lost my marketing job when Dad's company tanked and the scandal hit the news. Nobody will hire anyone with the last name Miller back home. I'm sleeping on a buddy's couch right now just to survive. Cameron looked up at me, his eyes pleading, desperate for a lifeline. I'm not asking you to forgive them, Eli. I know I stood by and watched them treat you and Claire like absolute garbage for years. I laughed at Dylan's stupid meme in that chat. I was a massive coward. I just wanted Dad's approval too, and I threw you under the bus to get it. But Eli, they're going to be living on the literal street next week. They are old. Dad's heart can't take the stress. They won't survive it. I looked closely at my younger brother. He was a victim of their highly toxic, manipulative game too, just in a very different way than I was. He had been bought and paid for his entire life. He was handed envelopes of cash to keep him loyal and dependent. And when the money finally ran out, he was left with absolutely no real skills and no idea how to survive in the harsh reality of the world. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out my smartphone. I opened a highly secure banking app. With a few taps, I transferred exactly $5,000 into a brand new checking account I had deliberately set up that morning in anticipation of this exact moment. I pulled a pen from my pocket, grabbed a paper napkin from the dispenser, wrote an address on it, and slid it across the table to Cameron. That is the address for a small, 1-bedroom rental property over in North Charleston, I said flatly, my tone indicating there was zero room for negotiation. It's in a safe neighborhood, but it is incredibly basic. No luxury appliances, no marble countertops. The landlord is a guy named Samuel. You remember our cousin Sam. I have paid exactly 1 month's rent. The keys are currently sitting under the front welcome mat. Cameron stared down at the napkin like it was a winning lottery ticket. Thick tears welled up in his eyes and spilled onto his cheeks. That gives them exactly 30 days to get basic jobs, swallow their pride, and figure out their lives, I continued coldly. Eli, thank you. Thank you so much. I swear to God. I'll pay you back every single cent. I don't want the money back, Cam. I interrupted gently but with an iron firmness. But you need to tell them this, and you need to make sure they understand it perfectly. That is the absolute last cent they will ever see from me. They do not call my phone. They do not approach my wife in public. They do not come anywhere near my children. If I ever see them anywhere near my property, or if they try to contact my business, I will have them immediately arrested for trespassing and harassment. Are we entirely clear? Crystal clear, Cameron nodded vigorously, clutching the napkin to his chest as if his life depended on it. That was the absolute end of it. The final door swinging shut. Over the next year, I would occasionally see them. Charleston is a massive city, but it operates a lot like a small town. The universe has a funny way of putting people in your path. I'd be driving my heavy-duty truck to inspect a new commercial job site, and I'd see Robert standing at a public bus stop. He would be wearing a faded winter coat, holding a plastic grocery bag, staring blankly down at his worn-out shoes. Once, Claire and I were at a large discount grocery store picking up bulk supplies for a church charity drive. I turned down the canned goods aisle and I saw my mother. Eleanor was holding a thick stack of cut-out paper coupons, loudly arguing with an exhausted teenage cashier over a 50-cent discrepancy on a can of generic soup. They saw us. I know for an absolute fact they did. But the very second their eyes met mine across the asphalt parking lot or down the fluorescent-lit grocery aisle, they immediately looked away. They practically ran in the opposite direction. The heavy, crushing weight of their immense shame was far too much for them to carry. They couldn't face the crushing reality that the son they threw away, the son they brutally labeled a loser, was the only one who actually made something brilliant and lasting out of his life. They were permanently locked out of my world. They would never see my beautiful, sprawling custom home on the water. They would never ride the waves in my boat or sit at my massive dining table. They would never know the brilliant, funny, incredibly kind kids my children were growing up to be. They deliberately chose money and fake social status over their own flesh and blood. And in the bitter end, they lost both. The ultimate revenge wasn't screaming at them in a crowded room. It wasn't suing them or actively trying to ruin their lives. The absolute best revenge was my complete, unwavering, and total indifference to their existence. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon in late October. The suffocating Charleston summer heat had finally broken, leaving behind a crisp, perfect autumn breeze that smelled like dry leaves and salt water. We were hosting Caleb's 10th birthday party in our massive backyard. The large stone grill I built by hand was smoking heavily, loaded with thick burgers, hot dogs, and racks of ribs. Nathan had flown down from our hometown with his entire family just for the weekend, laughing loudly near the patio. Samuel was there, leaning against the wooden fence and holding a cold beer. Carter Davis, the titan of industry who took a chance on a carpenter, was sitting comfortably in a woven lawn chair, patiently letting my daughter Lily put bright pink plastic butterfly hair clips into his gray hair. There were no expensive, stiff catered meals. There were no rented jazz bands playing softly in the background to impress strangers. There was absolutely no forced networking or trying to impress people who didn't care about us. It was just loud, messy, genuine joy surrounded by people who loved us for exactly who we were. I was standing by my heavy woodworking bench at the far edge of the stone patio, away from the smoke of the grill. Caleb ran over to me, holding a rough piece of scrap pine wood he had found in my shop. "Dad, can you show me how to sand this smooth so I can paint it?" he asked, his eyes wide and shining with raw excitement. I smiled, reaching into my canvas apron and handing him a coarse block of sandpaper. "All right, buddy. Hold it tight. You have to follow the grain. Look closely at the lines in the wood. Don't fight the wood, work with it. Let the paper do the heavy lifting." I watched his small, eager hands grip the sanding block, his brow furrowed in deep, serious concentration as he pushed the paper back and forth. My chest felt incredibly tight for a moment, but not from anxiety or the sting of old wounds. It was overflowing with a profound, overwhelming gratitude that brought a lump to my throat. I stood there in the autumn sunlight and thought deeply about the legacy I was actively handing down to my son. I wasn't teaching him to measure a man's worth by the hood ornament on the car he drove or the designer label stitched inside his suit. I wasn't teaching him to demand respect simply because of his last name. I was teaching him the enduring, unbreakable value of an honest day's work. I was teaching him that true wealth isn't kept locked away in a bank vault or hidden in a fraudulent escrow account. True wealth is having a wife who stands by your side like an iron pillar when your bank account is completely empty and the entire world is against you. True wealth is having friends who show up in the middle of the night to help you pump water out of a basement or pour concrete in the freezing rain. True wealth is looking in the mirror at the end of a long, exhausting day and knowing, without a single shadow of a doubt, that you built your life with clean hands, a strong back, and a clear conscience. My father spent his entire life building a fragile, beautiful museum constructed entirely of fake gold and empty promises. When the inevitable storm finally came, it all washed away into the gutter. I built my life out of solid oak. And no matter how hard the wind blew, my house was never going to fall. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. It was a long, incredibly painful road to get here, and recounting it brings up a lot of old ghosts and tough memories. But looking out at my family today, standing in my own backyard, I know every single hardship, every insult, and every tear was absolutely worth it. I hope this resonated with you in some way. I hope it serves as a powerful reminder that your worth is never, ever determined by people who are entirely blind to your actual value. Don't let anyone put a price tag on your soul. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to walk away from highly toxic family members or supposed friends just to save your own sanity and protect your peace? If you made it all the way to the end of this video, I want you to do something special for me right now. Go down to the comments section and just type the letter W. It stands for winner. This is our secret code. It's for the 1% Club, the group of amazing, highly dedicated people who actually watch a story through to the very end. You are the ones who understand that the absolute best revenge in life is simply living a massive, happy, and incredibly successful life. I read every single comment, and when I see that W, I'll know you're one of the real ones. Please hit that like button if you enjoyed the story, and make sure to follow and subscribe so we can keep sharing these journeys together. Stay strong, keep building your life on a solid foundation, and I'll see you in the next one.